My daughter-in-law snapped her manicured fingers in the crowded steakhouse, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like shattered glass. "Old lady, come here and pay the bill." Heads turned, but I simply stood up and reached for my wallet. The check was nearly $600, yet as I handed over my card, I felt a strange calm. She thought I was paying for dinner, but I was actually buying my freedom. The game had just changed. My name is Eleanor Brooks. I am 62 years old. And tonight, amidst the amber glow of crystal chandeliers and the murmuring of Riverside Heights' wealthy elite, I was invisible. I sat at the head of the table, a position that should have commanded respect, yet I felt more like a piece of furniture than the matriarch of this family. The steakhouse was alive with the clinking of heavy silverware against porcelain, and the performative laughter of families pretending to be happier than they were. The air smelled of seared prime rib and expensive perfume, a suffocating mix that made my stomach turn. To my right sat Vanessa. My daughter-in-law was 34, though she fought time with every expensive cream and procedure my money could buy. She wore a dress that hugged her frame a little too tightly for a family dinner, the fabric shimmering under the lights. Her nails, long and painted a violent shade of crimson, tapped rhythmically against her wine glass as she shouted across to a table of her friends nearby. "Oh, don't hold back on the appetizers," she called out to them, her voice piercing the low hum of conversation. "My mother-in-law is treating us tonight. She is feeling generous, right?" Eleanor, she didn't wait for an answer. She never did. She turned back to her friends with a conspiratorial wink, treating me like a walking wallet that had momentarily grown legs and sat down for dinner. Next to her was Mark, my son. He was 36, but in that moment, he looked like a teenager hiding from his homework. His eyes were glued to the glowing screen of his phone, his thumb scrolling endlessly. Occasionally, he would mutter, "Yeah, babe, totally, or you look great." "Honey," in response to Vanessa's chatter, completely ignoring the way I gripped my napkin until my knuckles turned white. He did not see me. He chose not to see me. Between them sat Lily and Jonah, my grandchildren. They were the only innocent things at this table. Their faces smeared with chocolate from a dessert that cost $25 a plate. They were laughing, swinging their legs, completely unaware of the glacial current running beneath the surface of this luxurious dinner. They did not know that their grandmother was suffocating. Then, the moment arrived. The waiter, a young man with tired eyes, placed the black leather folder on the table. He set it down gently near Mark, assuming the man of the table would handle it. Vanessa didn't even look at the total. She simply reached out, flipped the folder open, and then snapped her fingers. The sound was sharp, like a twig breaking in a dead forest. "Old lady, come here and pay the bill," she shouted. It wasn't a whisper. It wasn't a request. It was a command barked at a servant. The restaurant went quiet for a heartbeat. I felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes shifting toward us. I could feel their pity, their judgment, and their morbid curiosity. A woman at the next table paused with her fork halfway to her mouth. Mark finally looked up from his phone. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. For a second, I thought he might defend me. I thought he might say, "Vanessa, don't talk to my mother like that." But then I saw the panic in his eyes. He wasn't ashamed of her behavior. He was terrified that I would refuse to open my purse. I stood up slowly. My knees ached. a reminder of the years I spent standing on concrete floors and hunching over ledgers to ensure Mark never went without. I walked to her side of the table. I picked up the check. $587.50. It was nearly what a minimum wage worker earned in a week, gone in 2 hours of gluttony and arrogance. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my credit card. My hand did not shake. "You know." "Mom?" Vanessa said, swirling her wine, not even looking at me as I stood over her. "It's the least you can do. We are struggling with the mortgage this month." I looked at the top of her head. I remembered the emergency loan for the new SUV. I remembered the credit card debt I cleared so they could go to Hawaii. Every dollar I had given them over the last decade felt like a small, paper-thin cut on my soul. Thousands of cuts, bleeding me dry of my dignity. I handed the card to the waiter. As he processed the transaction, I looked down at Vanessa. "Okay," I said softly. "This is the last time. Vanessa." She laughed, a hollow, tinkling sound. "Oh, sure. You always say that." I took the pen to sign the receipt. The ink flowed smoothly onto the paper. As I wrote my name, Eleanor Brooks, I felt something inside me snap back into place. It was the final click of a lock securing a heavy door. I handed the folder back to the waiter and looked Vanessa dead in the eyes. My expression was so calm, so devoid of the usual hurt or pleading, that her smile faltered. She blinked, confused by the sudden stillness in my gaze. "Enjoy the wine," I said. In my head. The words were different. In my head, I was screaming, "Game over, darling. The rules have just changed, and this time, I am not the one who will be paying the price." The silence in my kitchen was heavy, broken only by the hum of the old refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of Merlot, a cheap bottle that cost $7.99 at the local grocery store. It tasted nothing like the vintage Pinot Noir Vanessa had guzzled at the restaurant, but it tasted honest. My small red brick house in Maplebridge was a stark contrast to the opulence of Riverside Heights. Here, the carpets were worn, and the furniture was 20 years old, preserved with care rather than replaced with whim. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the dark liquid in my glass. My mind drifted back, peeling away layers of time. Before I was just Mark's mother, or the old lady, I was Eleanor Brooks, the chief accountant for a mid-sized logistics firm. For 35 years, I had balanced ledgers, tracked every penny, and managed payrolls for hundreds of employees. I had scrimped and saved, paying off the mortgage on this house 10 years early, buying life insurance, and building a retirement fund that was supposed to be my safety net. When my husband died of a stroke 5 years ago, Mark became my entire world. He was a good boy, or so I told myself. When he wanted to buy his first home, his credit score was too low. I stepped in. I told myself it was what a mother did. I signed the papers. I told the bank that I would be the guarantor. Temporarily, Mark had said. Then came Vanessa. She was the golden girl in Mark's eyes. She worked in social media for a cosmetics brand, always talking about engagement metrics and brand identity. She was charming, sharp, and beautiful. In the beginning, I was dazzled too. I thought my son had found a partner who would push him to be better. The erosion of my dignity did not happen all at once. It started with small comments disguised as concern. "Mom, you are getting old," Vanessa would say, patting my hand with a patronizing smile. "Let us worry about the big things." But worrying about the big things quickly turned into asking me to pay for them. Mom, Mark had asked one afternoon, avoiding my eyes, could you lend us 5,000 for the down payment on the new SUV? Just for a month. Vanessa needs it for her image at work. I wrote the check. I always wrote the check. I remembered the first time Vanessa called me old lady. It was at a barbecue 2 years ago. I had questioned the price of a catering service she wanted to hire. She laughed, loud and shrill, and announced to her friends, "Oh, listen to the old lady worrying about pennies. She thinks we are still in the 1980s. Everyone laughed. I looked at Mark, waiting for him to correct her. He just waved his hand and took a sip of his beer. Mom, you are too sensitive. It is just a joke. The jokes became a habit. The loans became obligations. When they wanted to upgrade to the mansion in Lakewood Estates, they did not qualify for the loan. Mark had a history of late payments, and Vanessa had student debt she hid from everyone but me. So, once again, I stepped in. But this time, because of their poor financial standing, the bank insisted on a specific structure. The deed to the house in Lakewood Estates, that sprawling 4-bedroom palace they lived in, was solely in my name. It is just paperwork. Mom, Vanessa had said, hugging me. It is our house, but you are helping us hold it. I had kept every piece of paper. It was my accountant's instinct. Every time I paid off a credit card bill, they ran up. Every time I transferred money for a business investment, Vanessa claimed was a sure thing. I printed the receipt. I filed the bank statements. I kept the contracts. At first, I did it just to stay organized. The breaking point should have been 3 months ago. I had received a notification about a credit card I did not remember opening. When I investigated, I found thousands of dollars charged for designer handbags and spa treatments. The signature on the application was a shaky imitation of mine. When I confronted Vanessa, she didn't apologize. She didn't even look up from her phone. It is just a few handbags. Eleanor, she had said with a shrug. You are not exactly poor, and I needed them for a client meeting. Don't be so dramatic. Sitting in my dim kitchen tonight, the pieces finally clicked together. The humiliation at the restaurant was not an isolated incident. It was the final brushstroke on a painting I had been too blind to see clearly. They did not see me as a mother. They did not see me as a human being worthy of respect. To them, I was just a zero-interest bank that would never close. I finished my wine and set the glass down hard on the table. The sorrow in my chest was being replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I stood up and walked to the hallway closet where I kept my old work files. It was time to audit the accounts. And this time, I was going to collect the debt. My 35 years as an accountant had instilled in me a habit that neither retirement nor grief could break. I never threw away a piece of paper that carried a dollar sign. Every check I had ever written for Mark and Vanessa, every bank transfer receipt, every co-signed loan agreement was not just filed away. It was scanned, digitized, printed, and annotated with the date and reason. That night, unable to sleep, I sat on my living room floor, surrounded by 10 years of financial history. The silence of the house was amplified by the rhythmic clicking of my old calculator. I punched in the numbers, row after row. There was the $5,000 for the emergency car repair. There was the $12,000 for the once-in-a-lifetime vacation they claimed they deserved after a hard year. There was the constant stream of rent assistance before they moved into the big house. When I hit the total key, the number on the liquid crystal display made my breath hitch. The amount I had helped my son and daughter-in-law with over the last decade exceeded the entire sum I had managed to save for my own twilight years. I had been burning my own life raft to keep their yacht afloat. But as I sifted through the stack, my hand landed on the thickest file of all the deed to the property at Lakewood Estates. I pulled it out and read the legal description. It was a beautiful house, a place where they lived like royalty while I counted coupons. But there, in black and white, was the irony I had been too passive to leverage until now. The sole owner listed on the title was Eleanor Brooks. I closed my eyes, and the memory of the closing day washed over me. The seller's attorney, a cautious man with wire-rimmed glasses, had looked at me over the paperwork. Mrs. Brooks, he had said, tapping the document with his pen. I want to be clear. If you are the only name on this deed, this is your separate property. Unless you legally transfer it later, it belongs to no one but you. Vanessa had laughed then, a light, dismissive sound. She had wrapped her arm around my shoulders and squeezed tight. Oh, don't worry about all that legal jargon. She had cooed. It will be ours eventually. Right. Mum. You are just keeping it safe for us. I had smiled and signed. I was a fool. The next morning, I called Avery Coleman. Avery was the former corporate counsel for the logistics firm where I used to work. He had since opened his own practice specializing in estate planning and asset protection. When I walked into his office and dumped 3 heavy binders onto his mahogany desk, his eyebrows shot up. Eleanor, Avery said, adjusting his glasses. I thought you came here to update your will, not to audit a Fortune 500 company. I need you to look at these. Avery, I said, my voice steady. Tell me where I stand. He spent the next hour reading. The room was quiet, except for the turning of pages and his occasional hum of interest. Finally, he closed the last folder and looked at me with a newfound respect. You have been incredibly thorough, Avery said, because you documented every transfer as a loan or conditional gift in your personal notes, and because the deed is exclusively in your name, you hold all the cards. You have the right to change your mind. Eleanor, as long as we follow the correct procedure, you can revoke their access to everything. I nodded, feeling a knot in my chest loosen. What do I do? We restructure, Avery said, leaning forward. I suggest we create an irrevocable trust. We move the house and the bulk of your liquid assets into it. We name Lily and Jonah as the beneficiaries, but with a strict clause, no funds are to be accessed until they are 25, and absolutely no trustee powers for their parents. He paused, studying my face. But I have to ask you one thing, Avery said softly. Are you doing this out of anger because revenge is expensive? Eleanor. I looked out the window at the city skyline. I thought about the way Vanessa had snapped her fingers. I thought about Mark's silence. No, I said. I am not doing this to teach them a lesson. Avery, I am doing this to cut the rope. If I don't do this, they will drag me down until I drown. Leaving his office. I felt lighter than I had in years. I pulled my car over on the shoulder of the road overlooking Interstate 94. The traffic below was a river of red taillights flowing out of the city. I watched the cars rushing toward their destinations and thought about my own. If they treat me like a bank. I whispered to the empty car. Then it is time for the bank to close its doors and audit the accounts. I began to assemble what I called my war chest. It was just a simple wooden box I had purchased for $12 at a craft store. The the kind intended for storing knitting supplies or old photographs. But what I placed inside was far more volatile than yarn. First went the notarized copy of the deed to the house in Lakewood Estates. Next was the spreadsheet, printed on thick paper, detailing every single dollar I had bled for them over the last decade. Finally, I placed the draft of my new will inside. It sat there, innocent and heavy, waiting for its moment. I moved with the precision of a woman who had spent her life organizing chaos. 2 years ago, after a series of break-ins down the street, I had installed security cameras. Mark had laughed at me then, calling me paranoid. Now, I fetched the ladder from the garage. I climbed up and adjusted the angle of the camera above the front porch. I checked the feed on my phone, tweaking the lens until it perfectly framed the spot where the wicker table stood. I needed to capture every pixel of the expression on their faces when the time came. My financial extraction was slower, more calculated. I opened a new account at a credit union across town, a place where no one knew my name or my son. Every morning, I transferred portions of my savings. I kept the amounts just under $9,000 each time to avoid triggering any immediate flags or alerts. Mark still had the password to my old online banking, a remnant of the days when I trusted him to help me if I got sick, so I had to leave enough in the checking account to keep the illusion alive. At Larkspur Home Care Services, where I processed payroll part-time, I scheduled a meeting with the director. I need to request a remote work arrangement for the next 6 months, I told him, keeping my voice low and steady. My health. It has been a bit unpredictable lately. I need to be closer to my specialists. It was a lie, but a necessary one. I was not going to specialists. I spent my evenings scouring the internet for a rental in Seacliff, Oregon. It was a small coastal town where the wind smelled of salt and fresh fish, a place where people cared about tide charts rather than social media clout. It was the kind of place where Vanessa Ortiz and her Instagram followers would never think to look. Back in my bedroom, the packing began. I bought uniform cardboard boxes and labelled them with thick black marker kitchen documents, memorabilia. To anyone looking in, it appeared as though I was preparing for a renovation or perhaps a deep spring cleaning. In reality, I was curating my disappearance. Every time the phone rang and Vanessa's name flashed on the screen, I forced myself to answer. Mom. Her voice came through, dripping with a sugary sweetness that made my teeth ache. It is just... The pressure is so much right now. The daycare fees for Lily just went up by 10%, and my friends are all booking these summer villas in Italy. I listened, holding the phone away from my ear as she complained. That sounds very stressful. Vanessa, I said, keeping my tone flat. It is. She sighed, a dramatic, theatrical sound. If we just had a little more breathing room, you know I know. I replied. Just hang in there, keep talking. I thought, say it all now, dig the hole deeper. I went to a convenience store 3 towns over and bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash. I programmed only 3 numbers into it. Avery, my boss at Larkspur, and an old friend who lived near Seacliff. My current smartphone, the one filled with family group chats and incessant notifications from Mark, would stay right here on the kitchen counter the day I left. On my final night of preparation, I stood in the hallway. The house was quiet. I looked up at the large framed photograph hanging prominently on the wall. It was taken at Mark and Vanessa's wedding. In the photo, Mark looked handsome and proud. Vanessa looked triumphant. And there I was, standing between them, smiling that accommodating, hopeful smile of a mother who thought she was gaining a daughter. I reached up and took the frame down. My hands were steady. I opened the back clips, removed the photo, and slid it into the trash bin. Then, I flipped the backing board over so that only the rough, brown cardboard faced out. I hung the empty frame back on the wall. It looked ugly. It looked unfinished. But as I stared at the blank brown rectangle, I realized it was the most honest decoration I had ever displayed. It showed exactly what was left of our relationship, absolutely nothing. It was exactly 1 week after the dinner at the steakhouse when the phone rang. The digital clock on my bedside table read 10 o'clock at night. I picked it up, expecting the usual performative greeting, but Vanessa did not waste time with pleasantries. "Mom, tomorrow I need $300,000, she said, her voice tight and breathless. Then she corrected herself immediately. "No. Actually, it is 320,000. I need it before 5 o'clock in the afternoon." The sweetness was gone. There was no, "How are you?" or "Sorry to call so late." Her voice was sharp, serrated by panic. She started rambling about a once-in-a-lifetime real estate opportunity that required immediate liquidity to secure the deed. But as she spoke, the desperation in her tone betrayed her. I knew better. I had seen the news reports about the crypto crash, and I knew she handled the accounts for the marketing firm she worked for. This wasn't an investment. She was trying to plug a hole she had dug with stolen money before anyone noticed. Before I could answer, the phone was snatched away. I heard a scuffle, and then Mark's voice filled my ear. "Mom, listen to me," he said. He sounded terrified, which made him aggressive. "This is not a joke. We have people, loan sharks, involved. If we do not pay on time, it is not just us who will get hurt. They know where you live. They know where you work. The air in my bedroom seemed to freeze. They know where I live," I repeated slowly. "Yes," Mark shouted. "So do not play games with us. Mum, just get the money. We need the transfer." I sat there, gripping the phone until my fingers ached. A line had been crossed. For years. I had accepted their greed, their disrespect, and their ingratitude. But this was different. They were no longer just using me. They were trading my safety for their survival. They had put a target on my back to cover their own mistakes. I took a deep breath. My voice came out sounding incredibly tired, but beneath the fatigue, there was steel. "Tomorrow," I said. "You and Vanessa come to the house at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I will have everything prepared." 3 o'clock? Mark asked, his voice wavering. "Can't you just transfer it now?" I said firmly, "Come at 3 o'clock. But Mark, listen to me carefully. This is the last time. After this, there is nothing else." Yeah, I know. Last bailout, we get it." He rushed out. "Relieved? Thanks. Mom. Seriously, thank you." He hung up. In his mind, my words meant that this was the final check I would write to save them. In my mind, the meaning was far more literal. It was the last time I would ever allow them to touch my life. I did not go back to sleep. I dialed Avery's number. It was late, but he answered on the second ring. "Eleanor?" he asked, his voice thick with sleep. "Is everything all right tomorrow? 3 o'clock in the afternoon?" "They will be here," I told him, cutting straight to the point. "We need to finalize the procedures before 12 o'clock noon, move the Lakewood house into the trust, lock the accounts, cancel every single secondary card." There was a pause on the line. I could hear Avery shifting, perhaps sitting up in bed. "Eleanor," he said, his tone serious, "are you sure once we do this, after tomorrow, things will not go back to the way they were? You are burning the bridge while you are still standing on it. The bridge has been burning for a long time." "Avery," I replied, looking at the empty space on the wall where the family photo used to be. "I am just finally choosing to get off it." I hung up and sat in the dark. The house was silent, but my mind was loud. I did not sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning rhythmically above me. I did not feel fear, which surprised me. Instead, I felt a strange, vibrating anticipation. It was the feeling of a person standing before a massive control panel, hand hovering over the master switch, preparing to hit reset on 62 years of life. At 7 o'clock in the morning, the city was still grey and sleepy, but I was wide awake, sitting in Avery's office. The only sound in the room was the scratching of my pen against paper. I signed my name over and over again, each signature a brick in the wall I was building between myself and my family. With the final stroke, the deed to the house in Lakewood Estates was no longer mine. It belonged to the Brooks Grandchildren Trust. I handed the pen back to Avery, effectively giving him full power of attorney for the next 60 days. We reviewed the special dossier lying on his desk. It contained a notice of revocation of use, a legal document requiring Mark and Vanessa to vacate the property within 30 days. Stapled to it was a contingency plan, fully funded, to ensure that Lily and Jonah would have temporary housing if their parents failed to provide it. Avery slid a timeline across the desk. He pointed to a specific line item. "Here is the trigger." "Eleanor," he said, tapping the paper. "We have coordinated with the bank. At 2:30 in the afternoon, exactly 30 minutes before they arrive at your door, every card connected to your name will be cancelled. Your accounts, the supplementary cards Vanessa uses, the credit line Mark relies on, they all go dark simultaneously. It was a domino effect designed to collapse their world at the exact moment they reached for the door handle. At 11 o'clock, driving back to Maplebridge. I made a detour to the elementary school. Lily would not finish her classes until 2 o'clock, but I would not be there to pick her up. I walked into the administration office and handed a sealed envelope to the secretary. It was addressed to the future guardian of Lily Brooks. Inside were copies of the trust documents and Avery's direct contact information. It was the only safety net I could leave her. While I was securing their future, Vanessa was busy spending money she no longer had. A notification popped up on my phone, an email from an old friend who had been watching Vanessa's social media. It was a screenshot of a live stream Vanessa was broadcasting from a high-end salon. I opened the video file. Vanessa was waving her hand, showing off a fresh set of acrylic nails with intricate rhinestone designs. "Guys, seriously," she chirped into the camera, her voice tinny and distorted. "Big things are happening. We are about to close a huge deal, moving up to $1 million townhouse soon. You have to spend money to make money." "Right. Then." She leaned into the camera and whispered, a smirk playing on her lips. "Fortunately, I have a wrinkled ATM with a soft heart who just cannot say no." I stared at the screen. A wrinkled ATM. I did not feel angry. I felt a cold, calcified certainty. That single sentence acted like a layer of cement, hardening my resolve into something unbreakable. I returned home and walked into the kitchen. My main phone was buzzing with messages from Mark, bank notifications, and the family group chat. I did not unlock it. I set it to silent mode and placed it deep inside the junk drawer next to the refrigerator. Beside it, I placed my house keys and a single folded note. If needed, give this to the lawyer. I pulled my suitcase to the front door. It was packed with precision, my passport, my blood pressure medication, and a few photographs of Mark from before he met Vanessa. I checked the pocket of my coat again. The plane ticket to Portland for the 6 o'clock flight was there. From Portland, I would take a bus to Seacliff. At 5 minutes to 3. The house was silent. I stepped out onto the front porch. The air was still, heavy with the humidity of the coming storm. I placed the wooden war chest on the small wicker table. It sat there, unassuming and brown, right next to the old metal wind chimes my husband had hung years ago. A sudden breeze pushed through the yard, catching the chimes. They tinkled softly, a chaotic but familiar melody. To my ears, it sounded like his raspy laugh. "You do it, Elle," I imagined him saying. "It is time." I turned my back on the driveway, walked around the side of the house, and did not look back. At exactly 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I stepped out of the back door of my house for the last time. I turned the key in the lock, the deadbolt sliding home with a heavy thud that felt like a period at the end of a long, run-on sentence. I crossed the backyard, stepping over the patch of clover Mark had promised to mow 3 weeks ago, and slipped through the hedge to Mrs. Ruth's driveway. Ruth, my 70-year-old neighbour, was waiting in her beige sedan, the engine idling softly. I had told her I was visiting an old friend who had taken ill, a lie that tasted ash dry in my mouth but was necessary for the clean break I needed. From the back seat of Ruth's car, I glanced one last time at the rearview mirror as we pulled away. My driveway was empty, save for the long, stretching shadow of the old maple tree. The house looked peaceful, almost sleepy, with the curtains drawn tight. It is going to be very loud there soon, I thought, turning my gaze forward. Thank God I will not be there to hear it. As we merged onto the highway, the radio in Ruth's car murmured with the afternoon business news. The anchor was droning on about interest rates rising again and the housing market beginning to stagnate. They were just numbers floating in the air, abstract concepts that Mark and Vanessa had never bothered to understand. Yet they were about to feel the crushing weight of every decimal point. Miles away, turning off the main road and speeding toward Maplebridge. My son's black SUV was cutting through traffic. I could picture the scene as if I were a ghost sitting in the back seat. The windows would be vibrating from the heavy bass of a hip-hop track Vanessa liked. She would be in the passenger seat, ignoring the road, her thumbs flying across her phone screen as she managed her social calendar. Mark would be driving with one hand, his knuckles white, muttering to himself about the time. "Babe," Mark would say, his voice tight. "The loan sharks. They are texting me again. They said if we do not have the cash by 5. Vanessa would not even look up. She would flick her hair, checking her reflection in the visor mirror. "Relax, Mark," she would say, her voice dripping with unearned confidence. "We get the money from the old lady. We pay off half to shut them up, and then we take the other half to Vegas. I already booked the suite for the squad. We can double it at the tables. I have a feeling about black this weekend." Mark would force a laugh, a weak, pathetic sound. Yeah. Okay. Vegas sounds good. Back in the quiet reality of the shuttle bus terminal, I hauled my suitcase onto the curb. I thanked Ruth and watched her drive away, severing my last physical tie to the neighborhood. The airport shuttle driver, a large man with a friendly face, took my bag. Where are you headed today, ma'am? He asked as he hoisted the luggage into the hold. I looked at the destination sign on the bus, then out toward the horizon where the sun was beginning its slow descent. The West Coast, I replied, and for the first time in 10 years, my chest expanded fully with a breath of air that didn't belong to someone else. It is time to see the ocean. I have missed the salt. As the shuttle bus rumbled out of the Maplebridge limits, the black SUV screeched into my driveway. Mark likely parked crookedly, in a rush. They would step out, expecting to see my old sedan. Instead, they saw nothing but a silent house and a wind chime swaying gently in the breeze. And there, sitting on the wicker table like an altar offering, was the wooden box. I arrived at the airport security checkpoint. I took off my shoes. I placed my handbag in the grey plastic bin. I watched my coat disappear into the black mouth of the X-ray machine. It was a mundane ritual for everyone else in the line, but for me, it was a shedding of skin. The woman who was a doormat, the woman who was a bank, the woman who was just Mark's mom, was being left behind on the other side of the scanners. I stepped through the metal detector. The machine beeped once, a short, sharp note of approval. I glanced at the digital clock on the wall. It read exactly 3:30 in the afternoon. At that precise second, across the digital infrastructure of 3 major banks, a command I had pre-authorized with Avery executed. It was silent, it was invisible, but its impact was nuclear. Somewhere in the cloud, a switch flipped. My credit cards deactivated. The supplementary gold card in Vanessa's purse turned into a useless piece of plastic. The credit line Mark used to float his construction supplies froze. The joint account they used to pay their car lease locked down. There was no explosion, no fire, no siren, just a terrifying, silent click that echoed through the entire financial system of my former life. The Bank of Eleanor was officially closed. I did not witness the explosion with my own eyes. I was miles away, watching the blurred landscape of the Pacific Northwest rush past my bus window. But technology, my silent accomplice, captured every frame of the destruction. Days later, sitting in the safety of a rented cottage in Seacliff, I watched the security footage on my laptop. It played out like a silent film of a disaster, only I knew exactly what the soundtrack sounded like. The high-definition camera above the porch recorded Vanessa stepping out of the SUV. She did not look worried. She looked annoyed. She marched up the steps, her heels clicking on the wood, and stopped in front of the wicker table. She frowned at the empty space where I should have been standing with a check in my hand. Instead, she found the wooden box. She flipped her hair over her shoulder and yanked the lid open with the casual irritation of someone opening a package from Amazon that had arrived 2 days late. The first document she pulled out was the notarized copy of the deed to the Lakewood Estates house. The camera captured the exact moment her eyes scanned the bold text at the top. Owner Eleanor Brooks. Status transferred to the Brooks Grandchildren Trust. Her face went slack. The colour drained from her cheeks so fast it looked like a camera filter glitch. She spun around, clutching the paper, and shouted at Mark, who was trudging up the driveway. "Mark," she screamed, her voice distorting slightly on the microphone. You told me the house was ours. You said she transferred it years ago." Mark grabbed the paper from her. He squinted at the legal jargon, his lips moving as he tried to read. It was painfully obvious in that moment that my son had never actually read a single document he had signed in his life. I thought she did," Mark stammered, looking up at his wife with wide, panicked eyes. She said, it was for tax purposes. Vanessa snatched the next paper from the box. It was the spreadsheet, the master list. 10 years of loans, gifts, bailouts, and covered debts, culminating in a final figure printed in bold, black ink. The number was so large it seemed to physically strike her. She took an involuntary step back, stumbling into the wicker table. The wind chimes above her head, the ones that sounded like my husband's laugh, clanged loudly, a jarring, metallic applause. Then she found the letter. It was handwritten, short and brutal. You have gotten used to the story where the old mother has a responsibility to take care of you. This file tells the true story. As of today, the bank is closed. Mom? The footage showed Vanessa fumbling for her phone. She dialed the bank, putting it on speaker as she paced the porch. What do you mean? Closed, she shrieked at the representative. I am a signatory. I demand to speak to a manager right now. This is illegal. There was a pause, and then her face went blank. The representative must have informed her that the joint account had been frozen and her supplementary cards cancelled at 2:30 in the afternoon. While Vanessa was melting down on the porch, Mark had run to the gas station on the corner. I knew this because a stranger's video of the incident went viral in our local community group 2 days later. The shaky cell phone footage showed Mark standing at the pump, frantically swiping his card. Come on, he was muttering, hitting the keypad. Come on, work. Damn it. The machine beeped a harsh refusal, declined. He ran inside to the ATM. He shoved the card in, desperate for cash to pay the loan sharks who were undoubtedly texting him. The screen flashed a message. And then, with a mechanical whir, the machine swallowed the card. No, Mark yelled, slapping the plastic casing of the machine. Give it back. That is my card. The people in line behind him started to murmur. Someone sighed loudly. Another person held up their phone to record the man in the expensive suit having a meltdown over $20. Mark looked around, his face flushed with a humiliation he had never tasted before. Back on the porch, Vanessa had reached the bottom of the box. She pulled out a color copy of an email, the one she had sent using my name to open a credit card 2 years ago. Stapled to it was a draft of a lawsuit for identity theft and fraud. The note beside it was written in Avery's sharp handwriting. I will file this with the district attorney if you ever attempt to access Mrs. Brooks' assets again. Finally, she picked up the USB drive labeled Play Me. She didn't have a computer on the porch to play it, but I knew what was on it. It contained the audio from the kitchen camera I had installed months ago. It held the recordings of them drinking my wine and calling me the wrinkled ATM and laughing about how easy I was to manipulate. Later, Avery told me they listened to it in his office. He said the silence that followed was the loudest thing he had ever heard. On the screen. Vanessa dropped the USB drive back into the box as if it were burning hot. She looked at the empty driveway, then at the closed blinds of my house. For the first time, she looked small. She looked like a child who had realized the game was over, and the adults had gone home, taking the rules and the money with them. The fallout began the very next morning at 9 o'clock. According to the report Avery later gave me, Mark and Vanessa stormed into the reception area of Larkspur Home Care Services, demanding to see me. They bypassed the front desk and marched straight to my cubicle, expecting to find me hunched over the payroll software. Instead, they found a completely empty desk. The family photos were gone. The ergonomic cushion was gone. Even the stapler was gone. My computer had already been wiped and reassigned to a new junior accountant. The secretary, a formidable woman named Brenda, who had never liked Vanessa, stepped in front of them with a polite, tight-lipped smile. Mrs. Brooks is no longer with the company, Brenda said, extending a hand. She held a crisp white business card. From now on, all matters regarding Mrs. Brooks are to be directed to her attorney. Have a nice day. Mark snatched the card. It was Avery Coleman's contact information. 45 minutes later, they were bursting into the lobby of Avery's law firm downtown. The receptionist, prepared for their arrival, did not let them cause a scene. She calmly escorted them into a glass-walled conference room and offered them water, which Vanessa knocked onto the floor. When Avery walked in, he did not sit down. He simply picked up a remote control and turned on the wall-mounted screen. Please? Sit, Avery said calmly. On the screen, documents began to appear one by one. First was the deed to the Lakewood Estates house, then the trust formation papers, then a scrolling list of bank transfers from my account to theirs over the last decade. What is this? Mark stammered, his face pale. Why are you showing us this? Because, Avery said, clicking to the next slide. Mrs. Brooks has the full legal right to do everything she has done. All those gifts you received over the years, in the eyes of the law, without a gift letter, they can be reclassified as zero-interest loans. But Mrs. Brooks is not asking for the money back. She is simply reclaiming her life. Vanessa slammed her hands on the mahogany table. This is slander. She is trying to ruin us. We were tricked. She told us that house was ours. Avery didn't argue. He just pressed a button on his laptop. The room filled with a recording. It was Vanessa's voice, clear and distinct, chatting with one of her friends. Yeah, I just signed the old hag's name on the application. She never checks her credit report anyway. It is basically free money. Vanessa stopped breathing. Her face turned a colour I had never seen on her before, a mix of grey and green. The junior lawyer she had dragged along with her looked horrified. He leaned away from her, whispering urgently, You did not tell me you committed actual fraud. Before Vanessa could recover, Mark's phone began to ring. He ignored it, but it rang again immediately. Then a text notification pinged. Then an email. Answer it. Mr. Brooks, Avery suggested. Mark put the phone to his ear. Hello, what do you mean the loan is recalled? He listened for a moment, his eyes widening. But I have made every payment, because the co-signer withdrew backing. I can't pay the full balance in 48 hours. He hung up, his hand shaking. Then he looked at the email notification. It was from the HR department of the construction firm where he worked. I have been suspended, Mark whispered, his voice cracking. Pending an investigation into financial irregularities involving company resources. When it rains, it pours, Avery said dryly. Then he dropped the biggest bombshell of the meeting. And Mark, there is one more thing. Do you remember the gambling debt from last year? The $12,000 you lost on that poker game? Mark looked at Vanessa, who looked confused. She evidently did not know about that one. Your mother paid it off to keep your kneecaps intact. Avery continued. But there was a condition. In exchange for that payment, you signed over any remaining equity claim you might have thought you had in the Lakewood property. You own nothing. Mark, 0%. Vanessa turned on her husband. You gambled. You told me that money was a bonus loss, and you... Avery interrupted, turning his gaze to Vanessa. I believe the accounting department at your marketing agency is currently auditing their petty cash. It seems there is a discrepancy that matches the exact dates you purchased those 3 designer handbags last month. Vanessa sank into her chair. The air had been sucked out of the room. We will sue? She whispered weakly. But the fire was gone. We will sue her for emotional distress. Avery smiled, a shark-like grin that I wished I could have seen in person. He slid a single piece of paper across the table. You have 2 options, he said. Option A, you sign this agreement. You agree to vacate the property in 30 days. You agree to never contact Eleanor Brooks again without legal counsel. Or, Option B, I take this recording of the credit card fraud and the evidence of the signature forgery, and I walk it over to the district attorney's office this afternoon. The room was silent for a long 10 seconds. Mark looked at the paper. Then, slowly, he turned his head and looked at Vanessa. For the first time in 10 years, he wasn't looking at her with adoration or fear. He was looking at her with clarity. He was realizing that the woman sitting next to him wasn't a prize. She was the anchor that had dragged him to the bottom of the ocean. And the difficult old mother he had ignored was the only person who had been keeping him afloat. Give me the pen, Mark said quietly. Vanessa gasped. You can't be serious. Give me the pen, he repeated, his voice rising to a shout. It is over. Vanessa, it is finally over. It was 3 weeks later when I finally saw them again. We met in a sterile, beige mediation room at the Riverside District Court. I arrived early, sitting with my back to the window. I looked different. I had cut my hair into a sharp, short bob that required no fuss, and my skin held the golden tan of the Seacliff coast. I stood straight, my shoulders back, no longer hunched with the invisible weight of the old lady ATM. When Mark and Vanessa walked in, the contrast was startling. Vanessa sat on the opposite side of the laminate table. Her eyes were shadowed with dark circles that even her heavy foundation could not hide. Mark looked exhausted. He was wearing a cheap, ill-fitting button-down shirt, a far cry from the tailored suits I used to buy for him. They looked like 2 people who had been treading water for days and were finally realizing the shore was too far away. The mediator, a no-nonsense woman with grey hair, cleared her throat. The purpose of today is to formalize the agreement so that Mrs. Brooks does not proceed with criminal charges, she stated, opening a file. In exchange, Mr. Mark Brooks and Mrs. Vanessa Brooks commit to... I raised my hand, cutting her off. Excuse me, I said, my voice calm but filling the room. I would like to say something first. The mediator nodded. I turned my gaze directly to Vanessa. She tried to glare back, but her eyes darted away. You called me an old lady and told me to come over and pay the bill, I said slowly. That night, the check was not the most expensive thing on the table. The most expensive thing was the respect you threw in the trash. I turned to Mark. He was looking at his hands, his knuckles white. And you? Mark. I continued. You let your wife talk to your mother like that without saying a word. I paid for that silence for years. Today, I am paying for the last time. By cutting it off. I reached into my bag and placed a single white envelope on the table. I slid it across to them. Inside is a check for $3,000, I said. It is a one-time relocation assistance payment. No conditions, but no repetitions. It also comes with a restraining order clause. You are not to contact me directly without a lawyer present. Then, I delivered the final blow. Also, I added, watching their faces, I want you to know that I have retained a family law attorney to represent the interests of Lily and Jonah. I have prepared a contingency plan. If the authorities determine that your current environment is unsafe financially or psychologically for those children, I will step in. I am not taking them today, but I am making sure you understand who the real adult in this room is. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table. You are ruining our family, she screamed, tears streaming down her face. How can you be so cruel? The mediator did not blink. Mrs. Brooks, she said sternly, you committed identity theft. You threatened your mother-in-law with loan sharks. You can either sign this agreement, or you can walk out that door and face the district attorney. The room fell silent. We all looked at Mark. He was trembling. Mom? Mark whispered. His voice broke. Mom, I am sorry. I let them treat you like that. I will sign. He picked up the pen. He signed his name quickly, as if the paper were burning him. Then, he slid the pen toward Vanessa. Sign it. Vanessa, he said. She stared at him, shocked by the sudden backbone he had grown. After a few seconds of internal struggle, she realized she had no cards left to play. She snatched the pen and scribbled her signature, her mascara running down her cheeks. I stood up. I did not look back at them. As I walked to the door, I spoke one last time, loud enough for both of them to hear. I am no longer your bank, I said. If one day you learn how to pay the bills for your own life, I pray it is before those two children have to pay them for you. The heavy door clicked shut behind me. On the other side was the noisy chaos of their old world. On this side, the hallway was quiet. I walked out to the parking lot where my rental car was waiting. I got in and turned the key. I was heading to the airport, and then back to Seacliff. For the first time in my life, I was paying only for the things I had truly chosen. Thanks so much for listening to this story. Everyone, I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So drop your city or country in the comments below. Let's get a conversation going and share your thoughts on Eleanor's decision. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people. Catch you in the next one.